I welcome you to this year's Education Lecture Series, UNI's College of Education Leader in Education Lecture Series for this year. In the passion of the Civil Rights Campaign of 1964 and 1965, Jonathan Kozol gave up the prospect of a promising career in the academic world and moved to Harvard Square into a poor black neighborhood of Boston and became a fourth grade teacher. He has since devoted nearly his entire life to the challenging of providing equal opportunity to every child in our public schools. Deaf at an early age, a description of his first year as a teacher received the 1968 National Book Award in Science, Philosophy, and Religion. Among other major works are Rachel and Her Children, a study of homeless mothers and their children, which received the Robert F. Kennedy Book Award, and Savage Inequalities, which was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award in 1992. His 1995 bestseller, Amazing Grace, The Lives of Children and the Conscience of a Nation, received the Ansfield Wolf Book Award in 1996, an honor previously granted to works of Langston Hughes and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. 10 years later, in The Shame of a Nation, a description of the conditions he found in nearly 60 public schools, Mr. Kozol wrote that inner city children were most isolated racially than at any other time since federal courts began dismantling the landmark ruling in Brown versus Board of Education. The Shame of a Nation appeared on the New York Times bestseller list for the week that it was published. Mr. Kozol's most recent book on childhood and education is Fire in the Ashes, a sweeping narrative that follows a group of children in a destitute community out of their infancy and elementary grades through their secondary years into their late teens and beyond. Some of their stories are painful and heartbreaking, but others are dramatic tributes to the resilience and audacity of courageous children who refuse to be defeated by the obstacles they face and find their way at last to unexpected and triumphal victories. To Mr. Kozol's friends and allies in the world of education, he wants to make clear that he does not intend to give up the struggle for our children and the challenges our schools are facing in the era of persistent inequality and obsessive testing. He continues to visit children in their classrooms and to give encouragement to overburdened but devoted principals and teachers. He has been doing this for over 50 years, and he isn't stopping now. It is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Jonathan Kozol to the University of Northern Iowa.
Hi. It's a real treat to be here. I've been in much of Iowa, but never here before. I will say that I'm. Can you all hear me well? I know I try to be bipartisan, but I have to say I had enormous admiration for Iowa because for many, many years, my best friend in the United States Senate and the only person who ever talked to me honestly and passionately about the damage being done to children by testing was Tom Harkin. Anyway, thanks very much to Stephanie Logan and to Suzanne Friedman for meeting my plane in Cedar Rapids and rescuing me from American Airlines. And thanks to Jacobson Endowment at the College of Education, the Multicultural Education Center, the Center for Educational Transformation, and everybody else in Iowa. Just for my curiosity, are there any teachers from the public schools with us here tonight? Oh, good. Raise your hand so people can see you. Right. How many? Or what about principals or academic folks who started out as classroom teachers? Oh, great. And how about students who are hoping to be teachers? Oh, look at that. I'm glad. I always feel safer when I'm in a room with teachers. Teachers in the public schools, I don't need to tell you this. Teachers in the public schools receive an awful beating from the media these days, and from a lot of people who in politics who know nothing about education. In many states, they become the scapegoats for basically all the evils and injustices of our society. But teachers are my heroes. I believe that teaching is a beautiful profession, and that wonderful, devoted, and unselfish teachers in the schools that serve our poorest children need to be protected from the ill-informed and venomous attacks they undergo at the hands not only of politicians but of many corporate leaders, which are these attacks, to be candid, are not just attacks upon the teachers, but in many cases upon the institution of the public school itself. I'll come back to this again because it's an important issue. But first, I want to tell you very briefly about my own career and how I became a teacher in the first place. I started out in 1964 as a teacher in the segregated public schools of Boston, Massachusetts, my hometown. I never intended to become a teacher. I'd gone to Harvard College, forgive me for that, and majored in English literature. I spent all 4 years immersed in, Elizabethan metaphors, things like that. Sports, I studied with a great American poet named Archibald MacLeish for 2 years. But then I went to Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship and spent some time in Paris. And when I came back to Boston, I was planning to return to the university and get a PhD in English. But that summer, 1964, some of you are old enough to remember this, thousands of young people from all over the nation, white and black, were pouring into Mississippi to try to break the back of segregation in that state. And in the early summer, 3 of those young people from the north, a mixed group, 2 white and 1 black young men, who were scouting out locations for summer reading programs. They were going to teach poor black folks to read so they could pass the voting tests, which were given at that time, which is a way of keeping black people from voting. They disappeared one night in a town ironically called Philadelphia, Mississippi. And there was a wave of anxiety that swept across the nation, especially, I hate to say it, but black people had disappeared before, but this time there was white and black together, so that it became front page news. And 6 weeks later, their bodies were found murdered by the Ku Klux Klan and buried in the mud beneath a farm in Mississippi. That had a stunning effect upon me. I didn't know what I should do at first. So I drove across town. I was in Cambridge then. You know, if you studied geography in college or high school, you probably know Cambridge is where Harvard University is. You go across the river to get to Boston. I drove across the river into the black community of Boston. I'd never been there before, even though I grew up in the suburbs. And I went to a black minister who was a very respected figure in the city, and the local representative, Dr. King. And I simply said to him, I said, may I be of use? I said, is there some way I could be of use? And he said, yes, you can be of use, young man. And he said, I'm glad you came to your own hometown to address this, because you don't have to go to Mississippi to find racism in America. So I said, well, what could I do? And he said, you've had a very privileged education. I'd like to see you share it with our children. So, the next day, I walked in the Boston School Department, and I just said, I'm going to be a teacher. I'd never heard of certification. So, you know, they said, where'd you go to college? And I said, Harvard. And they said, then you can't be a teacher, because you couldn't learn anything useful at Harvard. So I said, there must be some way I could do it. They said, well, you could be a sub if you want. If you don't mind going to certain kinds of schools. I said, I'll be a sub. Sure, why not? First time I ever taught, they sent me into kindergarten. I was absolutely terrified. I had no idea what you're supposed to do with people that size. To me, they're like gerbils. but I survived. And ultimately, they promoted me to 4th grade. And in one way or another, I've been working with low-income children, mostly black and Hispanic, ever since. For much of the past 2 decades, in a section of New York, section of the South Bronx of New York, called Mott Haven, which is the poorest single neighborhood in all of the South Bronx, which is still the poorest urban district in America, urban congressional district in America. But not all that different in its, thanks very much. But the South Bronx, to be honest, isn't all that different from other major cities in America, sections of Chicago, sections of Des Moines, sections of Davenport. I've been there. Waterloo, I've been there several times. Or Los Angeles, or Baltimore. I've written several books about those children. One of them is called Amazing Grace. Another, The Shame of the Nation. I know some of you have read Fire in the Ashes, and another of my books was called Savage Inequalities. The sorrow of it all, I'm sad to say, is almost everywhere I go. Those inequalities in the funding of our children's education are still with us after all these years. And no matter what the claims of fairness certain states attempt to make, they establish what they call a basic foundation sum. Do they have that in Iowa also? But the rich districts can go way above that if they want. And now there's a new phenomenon in some of the major cities, even between rich and poor neighborhoods within the city, because back east at least, and in California also, in very wealthy neighborhoods, the parents are holding fundraisers for their school in their neighborhood that their child attends, but don't have to share a cent of that with any other schools in the district. You know, in Manhattan, New York, some of the very wealthy neighborhoods have, earned as much as $1 million in a single night to add to the budget of their school. But it's not simply inner city neighborhoods, it's also poor rural districts. in this nation. Poverty is poverty, and the traumatic damages of poverty apply to students everywhere. For children minorities, however, children who live in neighborhoods of concentrated poverty, there are several other levels of inequity that go even deeper. One of them, and I know many of you, probably are unaware of this, depending on where you've grown up, but one of them is the inherent inequality of virtually total hyper-segregation of Black and Hispanic children in almost every city of the nation, large or small. I've seen that, right in Waterloo. I don't know, pick on Iowa. Anything else I say that's bad, you can assume I'm speaking of all the other states. Now, when textbooks deal with racial issues, they tend to sugarcoat reality a bit, They'll sort of give you the impression, and the media does this too, they'll give you the false impression that racial isolation is primarily a problem of the past, which has been corrected long ago. And in reality, the very opposite is true. From one coast to the other, Black and Hispanic children in our public schools right now are more isolated intellectually and segregated physically than at any time since 1968, the year when Martin Luther King was taken from us by an assassin's bullet. Now, I'm not going to focus on race too much tonight because I'm more concerned with poverty itself, but I am old enough so I remember Dr. King. I remember him physically, in person. In this end of my first year of teaching in Boston, he came to speak. It was 1965, the spring of 65. He came to speak at a massive rally in Boston, one of those outdoor talks, and in a place called Boston Common. You ever heard of that? The Revolutionary War battles took place there. And it was a huge crowd. And the Black minister who had encouraged me to go into teaching, he and other Black leaders, they're very loyal to me. And I always say to young white teachers who hesitate to teach in a Black community, you're going to find a lot of warm loyalty and affection for you there if it's clear you're fighting for their kids. And the ministers invited me to walk with Dr. King and be his bodyguard. They didn't really need me. They had big eyes, but it was an act of solidarity. And, I remember his words. I remember his voice. I remember the passion in his eyes. I remember it was a warm day. I remember the perspiration streaming down his brow. He was mopping his head with a handkerchief, and I remember his dream. Now, every year, do you celebrate Martin Luther King Day in Iowa? Oh, good. Every year on Martin Luther King Day, politicians, usually white politicians, who've never lifted a finger to deal with this issue of segregation or inequity, go to some all-Black school, and I don't know why the principals invite them, and they'll give a speech to the students, and they'll typically say, "I too have a dream." But I always wonder what that dream is. Dr. King, my friend, did not say, "I have a dream that someday in the states and cities of the North and South and East and West, we will have test-driven, anxiety-ridden, separate and unequal schools." You know, I'm an old-fashioned guy in this respect. I still believe that Dr. King was right. I still believe that the ruling in Brown versus Board of Education was correct. That racial isolation in and of itself does tremendous damage to the young mentalities of children by giving them the message that they have been set apart, like an infectious subset of the population, so that they cannot contaminate the education of the mainstream of society. And I hate to speak so harshly, but I have to tell you, many of those children will grow up with a bitter but often unenunciated rage that will someday boil over when they're older. It may take only a single provocation. You know the poem of Langston Hughes, What Happens to a Dream Deferred? How many know that poem? What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or does it explode? You know, I was in Baltimore 8 days ago to lecture on this issue. You know, I told them, try to deal with this before it does explode. I hope you'll never see something like that in Iowa. But it was stunning feeling. I was just there. You know. Then, there's another kind of inequality that I think is terribly important. It's the inequality. This is a national issue. It's the inequality in opportunities for very rich and full preschool education. Now, I'm told that preschool and early childhood programs are widely available in Iowa. Is that correct? But you know, if that's so, and if it's not just access, but actual recruitment, and if these programs carry with them all the human services that children of low income need, what we call wraparound services, then you're very fortunate in Iowa. This is certainly not the norm in most states and neighborhoods of poverty, I know. I go into kindergarten classes in impoverished neighborhoods, and I ask the teacher, I don't trust statistics, you know. I just never believe them. For example, in New York State, there's a program called Universal Pre-K. Universal, but you do a little research and you find that only 32% of eligible children are served by programs. That's like a new definition of universal. So instead, I go into kindergarten classes in impoverished neighborhoods, and I ask the kindergarten teacher, how many of these little ones got a couple of years of real preschool before they came into your class? And typically, the teacher looks around the room, takes me by the arm, and says to me in a soft voice, Jonathan, if you mean real developmental pre-K, not child care, not grandma care, but the kind of program upper middle class and wealthy people purchase for their children, maybe 8 or 10 or 12 out of these 22, 25, 23 children, you know, got something for 1 year. Meanwhile, affluent people that I know, from one coast to the other, I'm thinking now of New York or Manhattan, enroll their kids in very costly private pre-K programs, starting in most cases when they're 2 years old. And they're very expensive because they just pour in resources of all kinds. The most exclusive pre-Ks in New York City cost as much as $35,000 a year for a 2-year-old. You know, 2-year-olds are very small. I just think, how much is that per pound? But in the top pre-Ks in New York, embarrassingly, they're known as the baby Ivies, because it's taken for granted that they're the essential first step to the Ivy League. So there's not even a pretense of a meritocracy. The game is rigged long before it starts. And then they go on to public school. You know, they'll all be taking standardized exams, right? The same exams. And guess which ones will come out with terrific numbers, and which ones will not, you know? And which teachers will be blamed. You know? Any comparison of test scores between very affluent and very poor neighborhoods is meaningless as long as this inequity prevails. That's my own belief. If I had the power, here's what I would do. See, I'd take, and I'd have to have a lot of power to do this. I'd take all that money that's going now to these billion-dollar testing corporations and test prep corporations and corporations that are printing scripted lesson plans. And I'd take all that money and I'd pour it instead into 3 full years of rich, exciting, stimulating, full-day developmental preschool education for every child of low income in the nation, and 2 preceding years of early childhood development. I don't think that ought to depend upon the politicians in particular states or municipal leaders. I think that ought to be provided out of the real wealth of our nation, out of the federal wealth as a national entitlement of childhood. That's my belief. And you know, if I had the power, I would add to this wraparound services, medical, vision screening, dental, early pediatric, and instead of castigating the parents of these children, which we do a lot, I'd add a parenting component to the program so we could actually help parents with the skills they need, and which they often did not get in separate and unequal schools a generation earlier. Instead of repeating that weary old expression, I'm sure you've heard this, isn't it, quote, isn't it the fault of the parents? You ever heard that? You know, don't those children's problems start at home? Yeah. Instead of repeating this useless incantation, we could help relieve those problems in the home by counseling and coaching parents, and where it's needed, by practical interventions also, you know, to fend off homelessness, evictions, and other crises that disrupt the lives of children. Well, would that cost a lot of money? Yes. But that's what I would do if I were president. I'm waiting for President Obama to invite me to lunch to discuss this. I need to say another word about the testing regimen, which has grown obsessive in this country. You know, no disparagement of Iowa in particular, this is a national phenomenon. Virtually every sector of the population has to take these standardized exams. I understand, for example, in Iowa, children start taking these high-stakes tests in 3rd grade, is that correct? And it's administered maybe 4 times in the course of the year, is that true? In many states, it's administered several times, and then there's what's called a cumulative test, which is the one that counts the most. Anyway, wealthy neighborhoods, as you probably noticed, the neighborhoods of highly educated people have expressed their bitter opposition to this regimen. Have you noticed there's a movement of parents who are opting out of the exams? How many are aware of that? Yeah, that's been happening everywhere. Typically, it's the wealthier parents who do this, the well-educated parents who aren't scared. It's poor people who are running scared. Well, the whole thing affects all children in our public schools, but it has a disparate effect, to be honest, depending on the kind of neighborhood in which the children live. In affluent communities, I see this again and again, in affluent communities, it takes a lesser toll because the kids, for all the reasons I've described, usually score fairly well on the exams. In the affluent suburbs, the areas, rich areas outside our major cities, people aren't frightened of the test. Their concern is whether their kids get into their first choice of college. And it's in the poorer neighborhoods. It's in the poorest neighborhoods that the principals are running scared and feel the obligation to reduce the daily lesson plans to a very narrow slice of skills that can be measured, can be numbered on a standardized exam. And teachers, I don't know if it's true in Iowa, but teachers in the poorest neighborhoods I know are obliged to write the specific skill they're teaching on the board or on the electronic board or dry erase board, whatever you have. Sometimes have to write the number of the proficiency they're teaching. Do any of you have to do that? Only a few. You're very fortunate. In many states, you have to list ELA. That means English Language Arts. Number 65B. Children will demonstrate their proficiency in doing whatever. You don't have to do that. You do have to do it, but not the numbers, is that it? Okay. I once saw a teacher in New York, sitting in the Bronx, a third grade teacher. They still have blackboards there. Probably still do. He wrote outcome. This was just for the 10 minutes prescribed for this. In New York, it was all timed. You had to do it at a certain moment. In which it said something like, ELA 65B. And then it said, children will demonstrate their proficiency to produce a narrative procedure. Have you ever heard that kind of language? So I said to him, I studied it for a while, and then I said, I don't think you can do that. I don't think you can produce a procedure. I think you can produce toothpaste, but I think you have to deliver or conduct a procedure. Am I right? And he said, well, I said, what does it mean? And he said, it just means write a story. So I said, why can't you say that? And he said, I have to stick to the standards. And he was scared. So this is what's different in the poorer schools that I run into. Not always, but all too frequently. The principals themselves are running scared. If they can't pump the scores, or they're now called growth scores, by let's say 2 percentage points each year, or whatever arbitrary number the government demands, they're afraid they'll lose their jobs, or see their schools shut down, and handed over to a private corporation. You ever heard the term EMO? You know what that means? It's like a for-profit company that claims to have an expertise in managing schools for poor kids. And, or else the principals are simply afraid of being humiliated in the public eye. So they tell the teachers, don't let your children, I'm thinking particularly of elementary school, they say, don't let your children wander too far from the Common Core, or whatever it is in a particular state. There's no time to let those children ask too many questions. If they're going to ask questions, you have to do that in the time slot called critical thinking. You know? And once you do that, once you decontextualize that, children never do much critical thinking because they have to. If you have to do it, if you're told you must do critical thinking, you've lost the critical edge to start with. But what the principle means is don't let them interrupt at any point in the school day where you have to teach the test-related skills. So they say, curiosity is nice, but it's not going to be tested. Spontaneity, originality are wonderful things, but they're not going to be tested either. Generosity of spirit in a child's writing will not be rewarded on the state exam. Delight in learning will not be rewarded. Delight, in fact, could be a very dangerous distraction. Delight and curiosity could get you way off track. The trouble is that children, no matter what their race or economic level, want to ask their questions. And the little ones, the younger ones, especially, like in first or second grade, are gifted artists at subverting lesson plans. They wave their fingers in your face. How many of you teach very young children, early elementary grades? I'm glad. Well, they're very squirmy little people. When I come into one of these classes, the teacher will often say, would you like to take the class for a few minutes? And I say, sure. And their hands go up, and there's always someone right in front of me, a little girl, I remember, right in front of me, who's poking her fingers up. And she says she's going to poke my eyes out, and she's making these horrible sounds. Ooh, 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 ooh. Ever heard that? As though she's going to die if I don't call on her. I don't want this little girl to die. So I call on her. She looks up at me with this absolutely innocent face, and she says, what? She didn't have anything to say. She just wanted me to recognize that she was there. So, there's the teacher with the proficiency or standard written on the board. And I'm thinking of a particular teacher now, doing the best to achieve the outcome mandated for that moment in the morning. And a little boy named Reginald, that's his real name, in fact. Little boy, I visited this classroom for a whole year. Reginald suddenly looks up at her, and he raises his hand, and he says, teacher? And she's thinking, Reginald's a good little boy, and I know he likes me, so maybe he's going to help me reach my outcome. I'll take a chance. So she says, what, sweetie? And he says, guess what? See, children never tell you anything. You have to guess. He says, guess what? And she, still hopeful, she says, what? And he says, yesterday, my auntie and uncle took me to the zoo. Now, she knows she's lost it. And he says, guess what? So she said, I might as well cooperate. And she says, what? And he says, and I saw a baby bear that had just been born, and they let me touch his nose, and it was wet and warm. And then he started to pile on the ends and butts, for one of those eternal run-on sentences in which second grade children are almost as good as William Faulkner. And sometimes at the end of all those ands and buts, there's a piece of hidden treasure where that little child unveils something deep and secret in his soul. And good teachers use that piece of hidden treasure as a key to unlock motivation. But in a heavily test-driven school, the teacher all too often has to cut him off and never finds that treasure. It will never know what lies within that child's heart. It's hard to think of anything that could be more damaging. Once we lock a child's spirit into silent stone, that child may not ever dare again to speak out in a voice of authenticity or pursue a curiosity into a secret place the people who write standardized exams could never dream of. I like kids who cause trouble for me as a teacher. They're the ones I always remember later. Let me take a few minutes now to speak to those of you who will soon be teachers in the public schools. Well, before maybe I'll say just a bit more about testing, just one more point. Then I'll speak to those of you who are about to become teachers. But you can listen to this also if you want. You see, you may not feel this here in Iowa. There's a certain innocence about Iowa, I always believe. I don't know. I always thought Tom Harkin was the best shaven member of the U.S. Senate, you know. He was a friend of mine. I just thought for all his power, he was, I don't know, just a very pure and decent human being. And a lot of people like that in Iowa. So, you know, you may not see the harsh edge of this as vividly here as you'd see it, well, certainly as you'd see it in school districts like Chicago, which is not so far away. One of the things that troubles me most is that the teachers in these schools are usually told they had to teach reading according to standardized material, frequently some kind of phonics-driven book program that's closely aligned with the Common Core. Any of you familiar with that? And, you know, not all these books are bad, and I should say, by the way, I'm not opposed to phonics, you know. I'm not one of those fanatic hippie types who thinks that phonics are a form of oppression, you know. Though I do know some phonics advocates who really are a bit bizarre. They seem to think that phonics is like the answer to all the ills of our society. There's a woman in Arizona who used to come to my lectures every time I spoke, wherever I was, and she come up to me. I remember at the end of a talk in Phoenix, she came up to me at the end, and I wasn't even speaking about reading. I was speaking about the farm workers, you know, and immigration problems. And she came up at the end and she grabbed my arm. A lot of people do that. That part of my arm, she'd squeeze it like as if that's a vulnerable spot. And she'd lean forward and whisper to me, phonics. I always call her the fanatic of Phoenix. I don't know. The point is, I thoroughly believe in the use of phonics. You know, children, I have nothing against a good consonant blend. You know. But what I really hate is the pressure many urban teachers are feeling now to not to put all the emphasis in the mechanics, how to decode, rather than the content of what the children are reading. So in many of these schools, like in one school that I know, that I knew in New York, they had this method that was totally scripted, where the teacher really couldn't present any of her own creativity. Or if so, she had to sneak it in, because it was heavily scripted, and the teacher could almost read from the script if she wanted. I saw teachers who didn't know the script well, who had the program right on their lap, and would keep looking down at it. And there were certain things I was supposed to say, like, I like the way Shaniqua is working with her partner. And she said this while Shaniqua wasn't paying any attention to her at all. Shaniqua was lying on her back, reading her, looking up at me. And what happens in these schools is they lose too much of the richness of reading real books. But by real books, I mean beautiful books, whether they're multicultural or simply wonderful classics, But books that are a joy to read. Books that remind you right from the beginning that the main reason, the only good reason to learn to read is not to get a number plastered on your forehead. It's for the joy it brings you, for the satisfaction it brings you. That's the only reason most people read. That's the only reason I read a book. So they're losing out on these treasures, like, I don't know, any of you, I suppose some of you know, do you know the writings of Eric Carle? How many know his work? The very, very, very hungry caterpillar. I love that book, and there was another one he wrote, The Grouchy Ladybug. I speak of him so often in my lectures. Even when there are no teachers in the room, even to a group of businessmen or women, I always sneak him in somehow. I get that hungry caterpillar into my talk. I do this so often that one day my phone rang at home, and I very seldom answer my home phone because I get a lot of strange calls. But a little voice said to me, answer the phone. This time you'll be glad you did. So I picked it up, and it was Eric Carle. And I was so happy. I said, you don't sound like a caterpillar. Because his sense of humor is contagious. And we talked a while, and now every year at Christmas he sends me a drawing. He does a drawing. And sometimes at odd moments, and he'll send me a little odd picture that he's done for a forthcoming book. I'm sorry to say he's ill right now. He's in a wheelchair at this moment. But, that's the kind of treasure that I mean. Or for children, even third graders who are advanced in their reading skills, maybe more likely fourth graders. There's a wonderful book by a man named Eric Henke. Do you know that name? It's called Lily's Purple Plastic Purse. How many of you have ever heard of that book? For those of you who haven't, especially grown-ups, I strongly recommend it. I just think it's an absolute classic. Right up there, I majored in Elizabethan poetry. I think it's right up there with Hamlet and King Lear. I read it not long ago while I was on a plane coming from Los Angeles to Boston, and a guy sitting next to me gave me the oddest looks, kept looking at me. He was reading a Wall Street Journal, but I noticed he kept peeking at my book. So, all I'm saying, and I can't emphasize this enough, joy, learning for its own good sake alone, immersing a child in a world of beauty and surprise, a world of the unexpected pleasure. I think this is terribly important, and in far too many of the test-driven schools, an awful lot of this is being lost. That's all I'll say. In many of the inner-city schools, I'm sure few of you have seen this, there's no more time to do class play or school play, or to, have some of the students form a little orchestra with, in the wealthy suburbs, I see it still. I'll see a carpeted area, maybe in a large entryway. I'll see cellos and violins stacked there. I never see that in these test-driven schools anymore. And I don't know, I think, especially for kids who have less aesthetic beauty in their physical environment, their neighborhood, we owe it to them to give it to them in school, And so now I want to speak for a couple minutes about the problems and challenges some of you are going to face in public school. And also some of the hopeful things. In spite of all the injustices and inequalities that I've described, wonderful, innovative, and creative teachers still can make a difference in the lives of children, no matter what the obstacles those children face. I see it every time. I also think there's a particular nobility of spirit when young teachers especially, feel a moral calling to work among the children of the poor. And in this way to help to heal some of the wounds of history. I always say teachers who go into the front lines of the public schools in our poorest neighborhoods are more than mere technocrats of mechanical proficiencies. They're also warriors for justice, and in their gentle way, they represent the best things that America is made of. If you do decide to teach in that kind of neighborhood, don't assume that children of low income are, quote, empty vessels waiting to be filled. That's a common misassumption. Every child I've ever known had something beautiful and stirring in her soul, his soul. Look for ways to bring it out, and let the children's dreams and longings be the starting point for lesson plans, rather than something that's cordoned off for 20 minutes called enrichment. Once you're in the classroom, please don't fall into the trap of demonizing parents, for example, if they don't show up for a meeting in your room. I'm afraid I began to do that when I first started to teach. But there's usually a reason why a parent doesn't come up to class. Sometimes they're scared. Sometimes they're so immersed in the chaos of their poverty that it's terribly hard for them to organize their lives and organize their time. An awful lot of families I know keep losing cell phone service because they get behind in the bills. Some of them have computers, some don't. Instead of blaming parents, I always say, find a way to reach them. Rev Jones' teacher, who was a brilliant teacher, but also very, very gutsy. She was a first-year teacher in one of the poorest neighborhoods of Boston. She wasn't from Boston. She was from Virginia. But she came up there and asked for that kind of neighborhood. She was very courageous. She had one terribly resistant little boy in her class. I mean, there's always at least one like that. And not always a little boy, but with great frequency. And he just was a real problem. I mean, he resisted her totally at first, and he wouldn't do any writing lessons she requested, even though she secretly believed that he had reasonable writing skills. And he would not stay in his chair. He was always somewhere else in the room. And, I mean, even when he had to be in his chair to work, he would wander from one desk to the other, and he would torment other little kids by little irritating things like stealing their eraser, something like that. And his mother never would come up to school. So Francesca, that was her name, Francesca, decided to go to her home, the boy's name was Dobie. Francesca just, after school one day, went to Dobie's home and met his mother. And then she discovered that they had been in a homeless shelter for a quarter of that year. And they'd been homeless for a while. He still came to school. That sometimes food was scarce at home. That they were struggling badly. And the mother was really grateful that she came. She said, nobody from the school has ever come to my house unless Dobie did something terrible. And other parents tell me that. Because I used to visit parents. My first year of teaching, I would, after school, maybe every Friday, I would visit the home of one of the children and get to know the parents. And sometimes the parent would be terrified when she saw me there. She said, the only time anyone from the school comes up here is when my child has done something horrible. I always afraid he'd murdered someone, I just wanted to visit, get to know you, I'd say. Anyway, her visit to Dobie's home had a really extraordinary effect. Suddenly Dobie, and I know, she did something more. I think it was around Thanksgiving that she did this, and she baked some brownies and brought them to him. And I don't know, after that he felt a real bond to her. And when they came back to class after Thanksgiving, suddenly he started opening up to her, and he could write, and he started writing, he couldn't write much, but he started writing short sentences for the first time, and autobiographical stories, things about his own life, and she encouraged him to do that. She said, I don't care where children start their writing. I love it when they start with something that they care about. By Christmas, just before the holiday, he did something that touched her deeply. For the first time, he wrote a full page, and it was a letter to her. And he'd asked her once what she'd like for breakfast. Now, have you been told as a teacher that you're not supposed to let children know too much about you? I don't know, probably not in Iowa, but many schools of education say, many systems say to be professional means not to let them know who you are as a person. Not to let them know that you have common problems, that you sneeze, that you get upset some days. But she wasn't like that. She was glad to have them know who she was. She didn't want to be a neuter, like a turnip in the classroom. She wanted them to know her. So when he asked, what do you have for breakfast? She said, I love English muffins with orange marmalade. Do you know what marmalade is? Do people still use it? And not virtual marmalade, but real marmalade. So he was he loved the sound of that word, marmalade. And he began to call her Lady Marmalade. And just before Christmas, he wrote her this little letter that said, "Dear Lady Marmalade, you're the kindest teacher that I've ever had." Because he'd only had 3 teachers by then. And he said, "You make me smile every day. Now I like to come to school." It went on for a while and ended. How did he end it? He ended it. Yes, he ended it. Your student, Captain Black. I don't know. He'd like to call himself Captain Black for some reason. Sounds like a pirate or something. And you know that, and it was a full page, and that was her reward. You know. Also, keep in mind that I mentioned this briefly before. The children do need beauty in their lives, and you know, apart from their family, apart from members of the family, a teacher in elementary school is the only grown-up who is with those children for 6 or 7 hours every single day, 5 days every week for more than 40 weeks a year. So if you don't give them happiness, who will? Francesca also had a mischievous side, which I liked. She did the testing stuff, but she had to. But she also was very honest with the kids. She said, I heard her say this twice. She said, the tests are important so I can keep my job. But I don't want any of you to think I value you one bit according to your scores. I value you for who you are. And I wrote a story about that classroom once, and I called it Heaven in 4 Walls. And it was like that. But if you are going to deviate a little bit as she did, you're going to be mischievous. I always say, be sure you're really good at teaching in that class. You know, be sure that those kids stay under reasonable control. I say, in other words, if you're going to deviate at all, you got to be real good at what you do. I was protected somewhat in my first year of teaching in Boston because I told the children honestly. This was a group of kids who had 4 subs that year before I was put into that class, and you can imagine how wild they were when I first came in. Another white guy, is he going to abandon us too? I had to win them over, and I said, listen, if you'll be really good and quiet when we file through the stairways, I think they'll leave us alone so we can have a little fun. And they played along with me. And one day, the principal came into our room and she said, Mr. Kozol, the whole school is talking about how beautifully your children file in the stairways. That was the highest compliment that she could give. But Francesca really did deliver the skills. And at one point, the superintendent of the Boston schools stopped into her class. He'd begun to hear about it, and maybe the principal had told him that it was an unusual class. And he stayed there the whole morning, and at the end, he told me later, because he knew me personally, he said, tell her she can do anything she wants. He said, I just wish we had more teachers like her. And I guess I'll end by just saying this. I know some young teachers tell me they're afraid of teaching in the poorest neighborhoods. Have any of you heard that or felt that? I mean, they're physically afraid. I'll simply say that all the years Francesca taught in that poor neighborhood, no one dared to lift a finger to her. In all the 25 years that I've been going into schools and visiting with families late at night in the South Bronx, no one's ever touched me. Sometimes I'll pass a group of guys standing on a corner who might look slightly hostile, but if any of them gives me an edgy look, there's always some guy who says, "Leave him alone, that's my sister's teacher," you know, as respect. I have a theory about the fears some young teachers voice, even though they frame it as a physical concern. I believe that it's less physical than psychological. That's my own belief. I think what they really fear the most is the close-up knowledge of injustice, knowledge of the suffering, and the challenge to their conscience this might pose. And I always find once they do cross that psychological line, they're suddenly liberated from their fears, and they grow into truly contributors, and in my eyes, heroic grown-ups. I'm going to end on a personal note, very personal. I'm at an age when time increasingly feels precious. Many people I've relied upon for guidance in my work with children have been taken from us over the past 10 or 15 years. I think especially, this may surprise you, you know, first of all, I'll say to the young, some of you look so young to me, I say to the young people here, no matter what your age, you're always going to feel that you need someone a little older and wiser to empower you, authorize you to do something courageous, you know. I need this. I've always needed this. And the person who's given me the most courage, it will surprise you, I think. He's probably the best friend little children had for 50 years. A sweet and gentle man by the name of Mr. Rogers. Fred Rogers, from Fred Rogers' neighborhood. And he was a real good listener to children, you know. He had a gift for bringing them out, which is why they loved him. Once when we were in New York together in Manhattan, we were the two speakers at an event, some fancy event, you know, in the middle of New York City, Carnegie Hall or someplace like that. Have you ever heard of Montessori? It was the 100th anniversary of the American Montessori Society, that's right. And after it was done, it ended kind of early, maybe around noon. He said to me, would you take me up to the South Bronx to meet the kids that you've been writing about all these years? And I said, I'd love to. And he, being very kindly, said, are you sure it won't intimidate them? I thought that was sweet, you know. Mr. Rogers could intimidate anybody. I said, no, I teased her. I said, I think they can handle it. So he said, how do you usually go? And I said, well, frankly, the quickest way is on the train. You know New York is the number 6 train, Lexington Avenue train. And he said, okay, let's go on the train. And he liked that idea. So down we went, the stairs, the smelly New York subway. Got on that number 6 train. It's only about 7 stops from the richest to the poorest neighborhood in the city. And people looking at him at the train, on the train, not quite sure why they're staring at him. We get off the train at a place called Brook Avenue. At that time, Brook Avenue was the worst street in the South Bronx for drugs. It's cleaned up now, but at that time, it's moved somewhere else. The drug trade keeps moving. But at that point, Brook Avenue was really a frightening place, and there were guys lined up all along the sidewalk. And but we were going to a public school. But, so we had to go up that street. So there's Mr. Rogers and I walking along, you know. And I kept thinking, well, maybe we're so culturally divided now that no one here will even recognize him. Baloney. Suddenly a sanitation truck screeches to a halt. The driver, middle-aged black man, gets out and lifts Mr. Rogers off the ground. Then I take him to the school, and I always take people like that to a regular public school, not to some, I don't know, some corporate charter school or something like that. You're blessed you don't have that yet in Iowa. But to regular schools, regular teachers, you know, and the teachers at that school were almost more moved than the children were. He squeezed himself into one of those little teeny-weeny chairs in first grade, and he asked the children lots of nice, interesting questions. They told them little stories. End of school, we go around the block to an after-school program run by an Episcopal priest that I know, a woman priest as it happens, an Episcopal church, right around the corner. And it's packed with children from the school, maybe 90 kids crammed into this, the kind of dining area in the church in the basement, getting their snack, you know. And there's one little boy named Mario, that's his real name, who was at the far end of the room. He was only about 6 years old then, a little on the plump side, a little round. He had a round face that looked like an olive with a smile painted on it. And his arms were a little pudgy. And kids that age, if they don't like you, they can make it painfully clear. But if they like you, you're in for it. And he spots Mr. Rogers right away, and he goes right at him across the entire room with his arms spread out. He looked like a little jet-powered bumblebee in a World War II attack plane. You know, at the moment of collision, he wraps his arms around Mr. Rogers' head, looks him right in the eyes, gives him a big kiss on the forehead, and says, "Welcome to my neighborhood, Mr. Rogers." Now he's gone. He passed away, as you know. And when I knew that he was ill, I used to pray, just like a child, you know, God, please let me live one more year, or maybe 2 more years, or 3. I'd sort of bargain with God. I know you're not supposed to do that, but I'm Jewish, and we knew him longer than you did. So, anyway, I pray just like you do for your parents or grandparents, you know. I'd say, God, he's such a good man, let him live forever. But of course, deep down, I knew he can't. None of us can. We all know we're going to die someday and lose the ones we love the most to death. The old trees and the innocence of children will outlive us all. Life goes so fast, my friends. Use it well. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much. Now that I came all this way